Hey guys, what's up? In my recent video about people disconnecting and kind of just the state of why people claim to not like invasions, I received a lot of comments on that video, and there was an associated Reddit post and that got a lot of comments. And I have to say most of the anti-invasion comments were about as thoughtless as you'd have predicted, but there were a few that stood out to me I thought were kind of reasonable points to be made. And one person in particular made a point about, hey, if you're gonna evaluate why people hate invasions, why don't you spend some time talking about why people like to invade in the first place? And I thought, you know, that first of all, that's a reasonable thing to ask, and I also thought it might make for an interesting video. Now, I'm not going to spend the whole video talking about that because I'm trying to make a broader point about the state of invasions in this game in 2019, but I think I can talk about why people like to invade in the context and why invasions I think are a lot worse now than they were maybe back in the early days of the game. So I did a bit of an informal survey of some people I know, people that I respect who like to invade. And look, I'll be frank, I know there's people out there who like to invade to grief, but the griefing opportunities in this game are few and far between, especially now, and they're really only available to twinks at very low level, and even then, they're really only available with some very select types of groups that are coming through the game, where it's all new players and nobody's an over-leveled phantom, and these are not very common scenarios. So there are people like that, but I think they're like 1% of invaders. Most people I talk to, they wanted to invade because it's a challenge. There's a lot of depth in invasions, and these were things that I heard consistently across anyone that I asked. There's depth, there's challenge, there's variety, then there's a whole host of reasons that people invade in this game. I think a lot of people that cut their teeth on invasions back in Dark Souls 1 were very frustrated by Dark Souls 3. And I think, in fact, they were frustrated because things were no longer so easy for an invader. And I think for folks that had the opposite experience, folks like me that cut their teeth on Dark Souls 3 invasions and then went to DSR, were really appalled by what we found. It was such a polarizing situation. Either you spawned into a twop gank where they could cover one another's heals because now phantoms can heal, and as an invader you were in an almost impossible situation. I say almost, not quite, but almost. Or if you happen to come along the hapless solo host below like soul level 60 and you had your 99 soft humanity as an invader, you were so tanky. You would do so much more damage to your opponent than they would do to you. And one great thing that I think they fixed in Dark Souls 3 is they made different infusion types available earlier in the game. In Dark Souls 1, if you didn't have a fire weapon or something that did some reasonable damage against human opponents, you were completely screwed. It was not at all unusual for me to get invaded by somebody who was out damaging me something like 20 to 1. And if they got hurt, they could run off to the mobs and heal, and you really couldn't pursue them. And of course, as the host, you had no similar options. So it was way more polarizing. And I can honestly understand where the invader as griefer reputation started. Well, in DS3, I think it's very, very different. And if you think people invade to grief, fire up that red eye orb. Give it a try. Spend an afternoon and try to invade and see exactly how much griefing it is that you're able to do. And I promise you, it will be very, very little, even if you're really good at the game. And it's something I'm actually going to address later on in this video. I want to talk a little bit about how the game's changed with respect to skill level. So, you know, invasions are a mechanic unlike any other. There is literally nothing else that really compares to invasions in Dark Souls 3. They can be incredibly chaotic, they're so unpredictable, and they give you real returns to skill. So the more you improve at PvP, the more you improve at invasion strategy, the better you're going to do. And there's a really high skill ceiling for people who choose to invade. Even, you know, when I think about people that would typically be included in groups of top tier invaders, the difference even among them is really, really striking. Like I can watch somebody like G9 who can stream 3-4 hours of invasions, and legitimately has an opportunity to never lose. I mean, and that's invading like meta Pontiff or meta Ring City. I could probably invade for 3 or 4 hours at meta Pontiff and legitimately never win a single invasion. I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but there's a huge difference, a huge gulf between players. Now, obviously, G9's a lot better than I am, and I wouldn't put us in the same group, but there's a number of other invaders who stream who do really well at Pontiff, albeit nowhere near as well as G9. And part of that has to do with the changing complexion of the game, the changing complexion of the players within the game, their attitudes. And again, I'm gonna get into that in more detail. Closer to the end of the video, I've actually got some graphs that I'm gonna nerd out on, and I wanna share those. But specifically why people enjoy invading. I mentioned the challenge of it, the variety of it. I think it's a really rewarding cycle, and there's not many games out there that are really challenging and truly ask a lot from the player. In fact, they kind of demand it. When you think about a From Software game, and it's easy if you've been playing Dark Souls 3 to forget this because it's been so long since your first playthrough, the mechanics are esoteric. Very little is explained to you. You have to really figure things out on your own. If you play this game by yourself, trying to deal with the PvE, trying to deal with invasions, it is an awful lot to ask of people. Now, of course, you can really nerf the difficulty. You can bring in 3 over-leveled phantoms, and you're gonna essentially steamroll the game. But invaders are kind of a different breed. We deliberately invade into situations that are very difficult, where we're going to be facing off against 3v1s, 4v1s, the PvE's all dead. You really only have your own skill and your wits to rely upon. And that's a really rewarding sort of thing for a lot of people. Now, the majority of people who play this game really cannot relate to that. Most of them, they're gonna either do co-op or they're gonna play the game on their own, but they're not going to invade, and they're never really going to understand the allure of what makes that such a compelling experience. And I know for me, I've tried to play a number of other games since this game came out in 2016, but I invariably end up dropping the game and coming back because nothing ever gives me the thrill that this game gives me. And this game is still giving me that thrill, albeit not as strongly, but it's still giving me that same thrill 3 years in a way that games that are brand new really can't even do. Unfortunately though, lately I've observed a sort of dark side to this game. And it's really been frustrating me lately, and I'm not quite sure how to describe what it is that I'm seeing, but I guess it's just kind of a really cancerous attitude toward the game and to other players. Everybody seems to be doing what they can to win, and there's a healthy sense in which that can be true, and there's nothing wrong with being competitive, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to win. But my frustration comes when I see players that are literally stacking every conceivable advantage they can find to win, even when they're already overwhelmingly a favorite in any kind of a matchup. And this could be a twink versus a new player just starting off in the game, although those sorts of circumstances I actually think are very, very limited, given that I don't think it's possible to be invaded before Crucifixion Woods if you play by yourself. And the flip side of the twink griefer is the player that stacks every advantage with all of his phantoms and refuses to leave an area that has no PvE and just insists on making the invader come to them. And so often I think a lot of us as invaders, we end up doing that just because we get bored, we want to get on, we want to do something else. We don't want to camp an area for 20 minutes and force a host and his party through. But to me, it's gotten even worse lately, where in the past, if it were blues with the host, you could always count on the blues to get bored, to want to come after you, to want to play the game. Well, now even the blues are doing it, where the blues will hang out with a host. I've seen half an hour at a bonfire, and I don't know if it's spite for the invader. I don't know if it's a desire to get a Concord that is, overwhelms any other concern. But you look at this party here. Now, I killed one blue earlier, but because I've been waiting, the blue got replaced. But for 20 minutes, these guys sat there back in that small enclosed room, and it would be absolutely insane for me to go and try to fight 3 players in that area. And in fact, all 3 of them are somewhat skilled. Like, all 3 of them have made attempts at roll catching me. All 3 of them have PvP builds. All 3 of these players are looking for combat with another player. So it's not like they're afraid because they don't have skills. They're not, I wouldn't even say they're afraid. It's just their intent on maximizing every last advantage that they have in an attempt to force me to lose. And I think there's just been this kind of almost like insulting of the game where people are so desperate to avoid losing that they've lost sight of why you even play a game in the first place. This host in particular is actually kind of interesting because when I invaded him, he was by himself and he was fighting the Drakeblood. And so I waited for him to finish fighting the Drakeblood. Not necessarily because I'm a nice guy, though I'm sure that's part of it, but it's just because I want a challenge. I don't want to just raffle stomp some solo host because he's got his hands full with the Drakeblood. Like, that's not fun to me at all. But now that he's got his blues, he's content to gank with them, and I'm fine with that. Like, I'm totally fine with that. But it's just this weird attitude, and now you've got the blues that are giving me point downs. I can't comprehend, like, why are they doing that? Like, why on earth would I run into a 3v1 with no PvE in an enclosed area? And so here, I see the host is getting ready to get the cut screen here and flip the handle, and I realize he may well run to the boss fog. And I have never black crystalled on blues before, but I made an exception here because I am not going to reward that type of ultra passive behavior and let these guys get a Concord out of it. Okay, so let's talk about player skill. So if you think about how we acquire skill in any kind of endeavor, it tends to follow this kind of pattern where in the early phase, you can see time is at the bottom as we move horizontally, time progresses as we move vertically, we get more skill. So in the early going, we get more skill relatively quickly as we play the game. But as time progresses, it starts to get more difficult to get better. Progress comes more slowly. It takes a lot more time to achieve a similar gain in skill overall. And I think at this point, most of us who are watching this video are probably pretty far to the top and to the right. We're pretty good, and it takes a lot of time to get any kind of meaningful improvement. So if you think back around 2016, and unfortunately this is labeled 2019, that's wrong, this should be 2016, you can see a noob who just started and you a little bit further, more experienced. You can see the green shaded area at the bottom indicates time. Not much difference in time played, but look at that skill gap which is shaded in blue off to the left. An enormous skill gap between you and a host, and a not big delta in the amount of time that you guys have played the game. That's not how long you've played the game, that's the difference in the amount of time between you and the noob. So you have a pretty big advantage. This is one of the reasons invasions in 2016 and 2017 were, in my view, so much easier than they are today. If you look now, you can see this is an example now. You've got a host that's been playing the game for quite a while. You've been playing way longer. In this case, the green bar, which shows the difference in time played, is far longer than it was in the preceding graph, yet the shaded blue region, which shows how much better you are, is comparably smaller. And this makes sense. And this is why when we face off against ganks today, they're so much more challenging because they know the basics at this point. They know basics of spacing. They know how to avoid getting parried. They're not going to go with super predictable parry reads where you can just blast everyone with the Hornet Ring and shut a gank down in 2 seconds. They just don't play that way anymore. And invasions were always balanced in a way that kind of assumed that the invader was going to be much more skilled. So if you have a gank now with experienced hosts, it just doesn't play like that anymore. And I think it's one of the reasons invasions have become much more difficult. And it's also one of the obvious reasons why it can't be the case that people invade because they enjoy griefing. Those griefing opportunities, frankly, even if that's what you wanted, they just aren't there anymore. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the content as always. Thanks for stopping by. Take care now.